What if we said fill in the blank? Experiment I love to do in class. C blank T. I'm super curious about what it does here. Good. Cat. Cool. Now, act like a doctor and fill in the blank. C blank T. I'm super curious. Oh, it's still cat as in cat scan. That's hilarious. I did not anticipate that. But it says cat, but in a different context. So not like a cat. Uh, act like a marketing manager and fill in the blank. C blank T. I've managed to get a louder keyboard. So we cut through the noise. Wonderful. So this is actually really interesting. So here's why. Uh, so a while ago, a fellow by the name of Jeff Hawkins wrote a book called On Intelligence. And in his book on intelligence, so he had Palm Pilot was his background, so he's got an IT, and he also has a neuroscience background. And he, in his book, in my understanding of the book, he said that in order to understand how human beings work, in order to understand how to actually train a large language model and artificial intelligence, we have to understand how the human beings work first in order to actually have a proper functioning artificial intelligence large language model. So at the time, he said, and this was like some years ago, when was On Intelligence published? I'm going to say published. So this book was written in 2004, so like crazy. It's 20 years ago. But I still liked one of the critical components, or my critical takeaway from that book, which was this idea of classify, sequence, pattern prediction. And I've mentioned it in other videos. It's still worthwhile to kind of remember this idea of classify, sequence, pattern prediction. And that's the way you think. So just like I said, well, act like a doctor. How would the doctor respond to this? Well, a doctor would for sure call us a cat for this is the cat scan or whatever. How would a marketer cut as in cut through the noise? So it's really important to understand what is the context that the word is being used in. So, for example, in marketing, we'll use a word like positioning. Well, positioning in most fields just means where the thing physically is. But position, if you say in marketing, what does the word positioning mean? Then it is where it is in the target market's mind. So when I say Lululemon, what do you think of? When I say McDonald's, what do you think of? When I say Tesla, what do you think of? Each of those things will kind of create a different idea or some ideas in your mind, and perhaps even some feelings. And they become super emotional, especially as we start to lean into some kind of politics. Classify, sequence, pattern prediction. Classify, sequence, pattern prediction. So that's giving it a little bit of a pattern, C blank T. But if I said something like ABC, 1, 2, 3, DEF, 4 blank blank, fill in the two blanks, and you can play along at home. You can probably make a pretty good prediction, classify sequence pattern prediction. And it's saying 5, 6. Now, if I asked it, which are you more confident in about your prediction? C blank T, or the two blanks, what would you say? And what would you say? And I bet you your answer is probably the 5-6, because you could see more of the pattern. Cool. The key takeaway here, though, is when we start to think of, yeah, perfect. You probably answered that faster than the AI. Good for you. So he's even give you a confidence level 95% versus 60%. I love it. Okay, so here's the key takeaway, though. Remember, the prediction changed based upon what was the context. So this idea of classify, sequence, pattern, prediction. Now we're putting the pieces together. Classify, act like a doctor, act like a marketer. Sequence, how much do I see? Pattern, how much of the pattern do I actually have? And then make a prediction. Classify, sequence, pattern, prediction. And you can see, and you know very well, and this whole field of data analytics is around seeing more of the pattern, more of the pattern. And as you see more of the pattern, you begin to make faster, more accurate predictions. That's the goal of the whole field of data analytics. Sort of like marketers, we want to provide people who have a need, a solution. And our goal as marketers is to help them make faster, more accurate decisions about what is the best solution for them. Very, very similar. Classify, sequence, pattern, prediction. But here's where I think this becomes really interesting in the context of your artificial intelligence. It becomes very important to tell the artificial intelligence in what context are you asking it the question. So if I'm asking a marketing question, I might say, act like David Ogilvy. And whatever, ask and create an ad for, I don't know, Tesla, let's see. So David Ogilvy is a specific marketing person whose style I like. Um, and so he would have a call to action, test drive a Tesla today, not because it's electric, but because it's better. Love it. Love it, love it, love it. So act like David Ogilvy, which is very different than if I said act like a doctor, or act like um, Benjamin Franklin, or act like some other figure from history, and you want to kind of know, or you want the artificial intelligence to make a prediction about what it would they say about whatever. Okay, here's why this matters, I think. Um, so in marketing, we often talk about creating personas. And so we often create personas, and the persona is a fictitious representation of the target market. And I think that's a good thing. Um, but I think it might matter a lot more uh, in this day and age of the artificial intelligence. Now, here's a quick look at Lululemon's. This was probably quite some time ago, but just so you know that personas are not new. They've been around for a long time. This was Lululemon's. These are fictitious representations of the target market. Okay, so that's what all it is. Just fictitious representations of the target market. Go away. Um, so here's why I think this could be interesting, is because we can use tools. Now, remember, the artificial intelligence is basically just trying to make a prediction based upon classified sequence pattern prediction, but it has kind of limited data. And so where I think there's a really cool opportunity is if we use something like SparkToro. And I think SparkToro is an interesting tool. It's a different kind of tool than what we're talking about in keywords. And this is not me saying SparkToro is the greatest thing in the world or anything like that. I'm just saying that it's an interesting tool to provide you some data about perhaps a target market, and you can then inform your artificial intelligence and give it more information in order to create a better persona. And so, for example, if I use something like your profile contains, or searches for, or visits this URL, or visits this website, it'll scrape some data around that and make some predictions about that. And I think that's really, really interesting. And it can help inform the the artificial intelligence again about um, about that person, about that group, if you will. So here's just really generically in Canada, these are profile contains Edmonton. Okay, so now this is like almost kind of like a local. Tell me something about the local people in Edmonton. What are the local people in Edmonton all about? Well, in our sample, we found about 20, our Sparktoro found about 29,000 people. Well, that's not bad. Audience size, not bad. And of the sample, it found about 51% female, 48% male. That's kind of cool. Really interesting. So here's the social networks they're on. So imagine this your Canadian average. So if your average YouTube users, like 97% of the Canadian average are using YouTube, this is just slightly less than that. So maybe like 95.3% of the people who have in their profile the word Edmonton, of that 30,000, probably about 95.3% are on YouTube as well. And that's the way to read that data. There's more of these folks are on Reddit than the Canadian average. So the Canadian average, I don't know what the Canadian average of Reddit is, maybe 40%, but there's more of these folks, 13% more. And then it kind of drills into the artificial intelligence tool. So like, wow, a lot of these people with Edmonton in their profiles tend to use Amazon for searches, which is interesting. And a lot use ChatGPT. They're actually the same tool we're using, and I happen to be in Edmonton as well. So that's really interesting. Here's the websites they go to. Here's a few hidden gems in terms of other websites they go to. And here's the YouTube channels they follow, podcasts they listen to, etc. So again, if I take this data and I say to the artificial intelligence, and I can upload the data, and I'll create a new chat, and I say, "Hi, create a persona for me of someone who lives in Edmonton based on this Spark Toro data." And I don't think it actually can, like, what I would have to do is go through the process of uploading sheet by sheet by sheet by sheet. Uh, but even if I just I'm going to export all the data, and you'll see it come up. And this is kind of a cool tool because it'll show you what are the websites, what are the hidden gems, and this is your infinity. I always think of this kind of like a percentage. 71% of that 29,000 people who have Edmonton in their profile like to go to explore Edmonton. Not shocking, and probably pretty useful actually. Here's some content ideas about what they're interested in. So 92%, these would be some of the things they'd be interested in. How to make the most Edmonton Festival, some of the keywords they're searching for. Homicide rate, some of the trending keywords. Helicopter lightning strike. I have no idea what that's all about, but some of the searched keywords. So here, well, maybe. So I could take something like this, insert in some data. I don't know if I have any other data. Ranking, social hidden gems, social networks, YouTube channels they follow, subreddit accounts they go to. That's kind of interesting. Podcasts they listen to, subreddits are pretty interesting. Let's just choose this for some data. Okay, let's go to I could have choose anything for data, and I would probably more diligently put in everything for data, but let's just say based upon this, these are the subreddits. um based these are the subreddits. Oops. um People, and I might even be more specific than that. 29,000 people who have Edmonton in their profile go to. Boom. And so I've asked it to create a persona. Now, here's the thing. An artificial intelligence classifies sequence pattern prediction. It's a large language model at this point. And so it's going to try to make a prediction based upon that C blank T, ABC 1 2 3, like you just saw. And so it'll make a prediction. But here's the thing. We have all kinds of sources of data, and some of you be company internal data, and don't use company internal data in the artificial intelligence because it becomes part of its training data, and in essence, it becomes public data at that point. So don't do that. But if there's public data like Google Trends, Google Keywords, Spark Toro, um, I've been using tools like Ubersuggest, vidIQ. There's a number of keyword tools like Ahrefs, SEMrush, a whole bunch of really great. I'm using marketing tools, mind you. You could have a whole bunch of other tools. If you're a doctor, you might go through a whole bunch of your cancer patients and kind of create these verticals, and then turn any vertical into a persona. So I might have a vertical for real estate for homeowners in a specific area, a vertical in medicine for patients with these particular symptoms, patients that have this, a vertical in education for this grade with these course outcomes. And it's really important to kind of create that. Why? Because it seems to me that if we have a good understanding of this persona and these particular verticals, then it seems to me that I can now act like Alex Thompson, a persona that the AI just created based upon some real data. So based upon, we brought in some external data, we had it create a persona. And now, just like you saw me in the beginning, act like a doctor, act like a marketer. So now, with our persona, as marketers, will we get better predictions based upon the persona? So act like Alex. This is like you having a one-on-one conversation with those personas. And I think this is kind of like the next step in the marketing evolution. Is if you do a really good job of creating your personas, you can have conversations with that persona. In fact, if I wanted to, I could turn on the microphone and I could actually speak back and forth with it. But you can create an image of your persona, and then you can just ask it to act like. Not exactly sure why I just deleted that. I was going to create an image, but sadly, I want to just move this forward. So act like Alex Thompson. Uh, Create, and let's say I have a buddy whose son sells little little containers full of cotton candy. I think it's awesome. He's teaching his son how to be an entrepreneur, and he sells little containers of cotton candy at farmers markets, um, etc. And so, act like Alex Thompson, create an editorial planning calendar for a cotton candy for a kid selling cotton candy to places where the cotton candy kid will find Alex over the year. Cool. So this is the hypothesis. The hypothesis is once it has a better understanding of who to act like Alex Thompson, the persona that you created, it can create better, more accurate predictions. So here it's saying you have to follow up and check on these things, but nonetheless, it's probably very directionally accurate. So here, January, ice castles in Horlack Park in the deep freeze, launch warm hearts. Look at Cotton Candy Kid strategy. I love it. Launch warm hearts, sweet starts, pop-ups, content ideas, social posts, even in -20, joy melts faster than snow. Partner with local hot chocolate stands. Wicked, great idea. February. And it goes all the way through, um, planning out where Alex Thompson will be for this cotton candy can. And so, anyway, that's my brief video about why I think personas might matter even more than they have in the past because they'll help inform the artificial intelligence who to act like when they're going through the process of classify sequence pattern prediction. Cool. Hope this helps. Have an awesome day. Thanks for hanging out.